live from Brooklyn. It's Monday night.
Yeah.
Whoopee. And I'd love to introduce the crew to you. So first, from Columbus, Ohio, Mr. Donald Culp.
Hello, everybody.
And then from Nashville?
Yes, Nashville.
Yes, Nashville. John Tudor comes to us.
Good evening, everyone.
And then from Connecticut, we have Chris Ray, just down the street from me. Hey,
hello,
Chris.
everyone.
And then back to Brooklyn, where we have a very serious lack of grain elevators.
Still?
I still don't know why. Nobody seems to have any answers. Could be there's no cornfields around here. That could be it.
It's a conspiracy, Don.
It is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the Illuminati is behind it.
Oh, definitely.
Well, Don, could you open us up with a word of prayer?
Well, most gracious and wonderful Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time where we can gather together as a family and hear your word. And we thank you for that word and how it's truth and it sets us free when we hear it. And we thank you for the blessing that it is as people hear it, that it heals their bodies, it heals their minds and hearts, and we just are totally blessed to be able to have this word available to us. We didn't do anything to earn it. We're just so thankful that we were in the right place at the right time to be able to hear the word of God like it's never been taught before. And so we just hold her high, and we just thank you for the opportunity in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, I've got a real short quickie that I'm going to go over tonight. And it's quite something. This past week we had another school shooting here in Florida. Well, not here in Florida, in Florida. And I've seen a lot of discussion on this. Some people saying, well, we got to change the gun laws. Well, we've got gun laws coming out the wazoo, and they don't work because they don't enforce them. So all they're looking for is another law that they're not going to enforce. And there's reasons for that, but I'm not going to get into all of that. But it seems to me we need to have a cultural shift in this country. If you look at the past century, there's some things that happened that kind of fueled what's going on right now. It started, well, with the most recent history around the end of World War I. It was the first attempt at world government called the League of Nations, and it failed. Thankfully, it failed. Then again, after World War II, they went for the United Nations, and that was successful. They got that set up, and if you have ever watched or learned the history of the UN, because you'll see it gets worse and worse as we progress through the last half of the last century and into this century. It has just gotten more and more subversive and just going in a rotten direction as far as I'm concerned. Now, there's a verse that talks about this in Philippians, and I'm going to show that to you right here. Verse 8. To understand that first word, finally, brethren, you have to read the first 4 chapters. We don't have the time for that, and this is going to be a 5-minute teaching, not a 5-hour teaching. So it says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and there be any praise, think on these things. Now, we haven't had much of that. I mean, if you look at the culture now, what do you have on TV? You have movies that glorify mass murderers. It's a show called Dexter. He's a mass murderer, and this show is glorifying him. And how long can he get away with this? There was a show about a teacher who couldn't make it on his teacher's salary, so he becomes a drug lord, and he dies in a hail of bullets at the end of the series. Well, you know, we've had shows about, you know, sexual promiscuity, promiscuity. And these are things that are seeping into the minds of people. There's shows about, you know, openly gay people that, you know, 40 years ago, they never would have been allowed to do something like that. And I mean, the culture, you can just see that it's heading down. And I think it's because we've lost track of the word and God in our society. I want to go back to this verse and read it again. Okay, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true. Well, the word of God is truth. What the word of God says to do, you should do. You shouldn't be, it says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor with his hands that he may give to him who needeth. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but rather let your conversation be to the edifying of the church. Our hearts being knit together in love. There's a good one. The Christian church has just totally failed at that. That our hearts should be knit together in love. Most of the times you get Christians fighting with each other. Go on to Facebook. Go to a Christian page and you'll see nothing but fighting going on there. That's not what God told us to do. And just all in all, it has gotten so dark. Our society has become so dark. Now, of course, to counteract that, you have us. We're sitting here holding forth the word of light. We're bringing light to the situation. And like I said, I've told these guys before, I remember this one night back in Ohio when before I met Don, we were going through a training because we were all going all out over the country. And this is back before I met my wife too. We were going to go out for this, you know, go out and hold forth the word. And the person who was in charge took us out in the middle of this field one very dark night. And he held up a lighter and he lit it. And all the darkness in that field could not put out that light. But that light just dispelled the darkness. There were 1,000 of us in that field. We could all clearly see that flashlight or that lighter. And, you know, I will never forget that demonstration because all the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of the word. That's why 4:8 says to think on these things. So as you go out just remember to think on the things that are pure, that are lovely, that are, let's go over that again. The things are, let's see, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. So let's quit concentrating on the crap in the world and start getting back to thinking about the Word of God and what God wants. Hey, Alan. I know I caught you with your mute on.
Hey, Don, God bless you guys. Long time you no see me. I no see you.
Yeah, too long.
Where's
Well,
my picture at? How come I ain't got a picture on there? Oh,
there it is.
you do. I got a picture there.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. Yeah, I got my hair tied up. You like that?
Oh, that's cute. A man bun.
Oh, and I can't stay on long. I just
Okay.
got in a few minutes ago, and I got to get up early. Just drop in to say hi, and I'm sorry I haven't been here. I miss you guys.
Oh, we miss you too, Alan. Maybe someday you can get back here and do some more Romans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sunday? What's going on Sunday?
I said some.
Oh,
S-O-M-E. You are tired, aren't you?
I'm exhausted. It was a long day today. Crazy. I had a delivery. I'll tell you, I'm sure thankful for God. You know, I pray every morning, hedge of protection, watch over my driving. Well, he watched over me today. I had a load that was like 1,300 pounds, and I'm driving the small truck, and I had to place the pallet in the middle and sideways. And I'm driving down the road, and this lady in front of me is driving slow and kind of moves over to the right. Wasn't going no more than 20, 25 mile an hour. And she kind of moves over to the right, and I'm figuring she's wanting me to pass. Well, I commenced to pass, and she commenced to make a U-turn. So it's throw on the brakes and swerve over to the left. And she's kind of looking at me like I'm crazy. Look, lady, you're the one that... And all of my cargo, they stacked the two boxes on top of each other, like 700 pounds each. And it slid off of the pallet and slid forward, and they wouldn't accept it. I was right around the corner from the delivery. Yeah. They wouldn't accept it because they said it was off the pallet and damaged. Now, I called my boss and told him what happened. He said, well, I'll call you back in a few minutes. I drive away, and I back up to a telephone pole, and I grab the strap and the chain that was in the truck, and I maneuvered it back to the telephone pole, and I took the strap and put it around the first piece of cargo and hooked the chain around the telephone pole, pulled and then locked it all down, pulled forward a little bit to readjust the top piece of top box. I did it to the bottom box and then pulled it to the back end of the truck. So enough to where I could get the pallet jack under it and turn it in a way where they can pick it up, and they accepted it. Yay! Everybody say, yay! There was no accident. Nobody was hurt. And I got my cargo delivered.
Wow. Praise God.
My cat's still missing. I didn't tell you guys that. I brought my cat home. Well, this is going on the third week. And for like 2 weeks, he's loving the place. Caught his first mouse. Brought it to me and let me know. Look, he's had this look on his face, his tail sticking straight up in the air. Look what I got. Having a blast. One morning I left and came back and he was gone. And this is the third week. Been praying every day. Father, I want my kitty cat back. Anyway, he's watching over him. Told him to send an angel, watch over him, send him back home. I'm trying to be patient, but you get to liking somebody and then they're gone.
Yeah.
You guys know how that is, I'm sure.
Very
yeah.
definitely.
Anyway, that's my story. And I can't stay on, you guys. I'm
Okay.
exhausted. I'm gonna fall asleep in the next few minutes.
If
I
you
still
have to
got a
go,
few
Alan,
things to
yeah,
do before even.
this ain't the way
Sneak out the
international.
door.
You don't have to explain.
I know, but I miss you guys.
Miss
This
you
has been a
too.
lot of fun to me, hanging out on Monday nights.
Yeah. Same here.
Anyway, love you guys. I will try to pop back in when I get have a better opportunity.
Okay, cool.
You'll
Okay.
stay as long as you can.
Talk to you guys later.
All right.
Later,
Love
Alan.
you. Love you.
Love you too.
Yeah.
That was
Okay,
really cool.
that was great.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've seen Alan. I really miss him. Great
Yeah.
man. Well, in the meantime, Mr. Culp has something he wants to tell us tonight.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to share some more words. How about that?
Cool.
All right.
Yeah. When a few weeks ago, we were talking about the Last Supper and some of the things that happened during and around the Last Supper. And we used information from all over the Bible to find out what all happened during that evening. Found out that there was a lot of things that went on during that evening that maybe some people hadn't thought about. And that kind of learning is based on a concept or a principle called context. And in that particular situation, where you're using information from different books of the Bible or other places in the Bible that talk about that same subject or the same topic or the same incident, it's the remote context. And a lot of people use it at their convenience. But when you use it all the time, there are many things that we can learn about things in the Bible. And instead of having a vague picture of something, we can fill in the holes, fill in the gaps, and get a better picture of maybe how things work. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. Only we're going to start where we left off. Jesus was arrested in the garden. And then what happened? They led him away. And so that's where we're going to pick it up. And we're going to read some things. We're going to read some verses. And one of the things I want to do right off the bat is, where did he go? Where did they take him? So we're going to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and find out where he went. Okay? Because there's additional information if we go to all four, then rather than if we were to just go to one. And what we're going to do is we're going to start there, and we're going to end with the time of day when he was led to the cross, or led to his crucifixion. And you'll find that from when you put all this together, there's no way it could have happened overnight. There had to be way more time involved. And I think you might see that when we start reading from all over the place about the same incident. A while back, a man of God that we all know and love shared some things about this and told us that there is more written in the Bible about the last week of Jesus Christ's life, his death and resurrection, than any other topic in the Bible. In other words, there's a lot in here. And so we're just going to see a little bit of how much there is. we could easily spend a whole lot more time than we're going to spend tonight, but we're just going to do it a little bit. This is kind of how I like to study the Bible. And so you get a little share, you get to see a little bit how I do things. And this is kind of the thing that really I get excited about. Hopefully I won't put you to sleep, because sometimes I think that when I'm excited, I may not be, but this is really cool. I like this. We'll start reading in Matthew. We'll read Matthew, then we'll read Mark, and then we'll read Luke, and then we'll read John, and then we'll pick it up from there. So after Jesus was arrested, it says in Matthew 26, verse 57, it says, those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Okay, so where did they take him? To Caiaphas the high priest. All right, that's what Matthew says. Okay, what does Mark say? Mark 14:53. Mark 14:53 says, they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together and were there also. So that's what Mark says. So it just says that they took him to the high priest. Okay, so Matthew says they took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now we know also from Mark it says, yep, they took him to the high priest. All the chief priests and elders were all there too. Okay, so far not much new. Going on to Luke. Luke chapter 22, verse 54, towards the end of the chapter. Luke 22:54. I'm reading out of the NIV, by the way, in case you're wondering. Just because I'm going to be reading a lot and it's going to be easier to follow. Okay? Luke 22:54 says, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. All right, so everything sounds pretty much the same here. No new news, no new information. Moving on to John chapter 18. John chapter 18 and verse 12. Now this is what it says in John 18:12. It says, then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him, and then verse 13, and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Very cool. All of a sudden, we have some new information. Matthew, Mark, and Luke said they took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. But here in John, it says they brought him first to Annas. Annas was also a high priest at that time. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas' wife was Annas's daughter, i.e., they were both married. I just think that's something that very interesting, considering some people do not think that priests should be married. Well, these guys were married. Anyways, moving on. Just that's something that hits my head when I'm reading. I think about these things. He's got kids. How do you get kids? Well, they're married. All right. So then it says also that meanwhile, while Jesus was at Annas, the house of Annas, that Peter was there and made his first denial at that time. During all of the events that are going to follow, Peter kind of shows up, and most of his denials occur during this late hour, the latter half of the night. Jesus was probably arrested around, I don't know, sometime between 10 and 12 in the evening, 10 in the evening and midnight, probably a little before midnight. Midnight was when the third quarter of the night began. The night time was not divided into hours. It was divided into watches, the night watches. You had the evening watch, which was like from sundown to like 9 p.m. You had the midnight watch, which was from 9 p.m. to about midnight. And then you had the cock crowing watch from midnight to 3 a.m. And then you had the morning watch, which was 3 a.m. to sunrise. So it was divided into watches, what they called watches. And the Romans had them divided into those 4 watches. The Hebrews had 3 watches, but they adopted the 4-watch scenario as time came to be. Now, there is some questioning about how time was reckoned, whether it was by hours of the day, where like the Romans kept hours from midnight to midnight like we do now. At least that's the teaching. But in the Bible, whenever it's the first hour of the day, it's usually right at the first hour after sunrise. If it's the 6th hour of the day, it's noon. If it's the 3rd hour of the day, it's 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. So you got 12 hours in the day, so they usually count them. It's the first hour, 2nd hour, so on and so forth. And there is no reason to believe, after we read this, that any of those hours mean anything other than that it's the 6th hour of the day rather than the 6th hour as like 6 a.m. starting from midnight, because they just didn't keep time that way. Even the Romans didn't keep time that way. So anyways, moving right along. Got a lot to read. So he's at Annas, and then after he's at Annas, Annas quizzes Jesus, and Jesus replies with something like one. Let's see, what is it here? Let's start in John 18. We'll read a few verses here. This all took place at Annas, before Annas the high priest. John 18 and in verse 19, it says, "Meanwhile, while Peter was denying Jesus, the high priest, Annas, questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching." He's having a little conversation. And Jesus said, "Well, I have spoken openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why the question? Ask those who heard me. Surely they will know what I said." Well, apparently, one of the guys thought that Jesus answered him a little snubly, whatever. Verse 22, when Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Said, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus said, "If I said something wrong," Jesus tried, "testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him. That was enough for Annas. He was done. So then it says in verse 24, then Annas sent him bound to his son-in-law, Caiaphas, the high priest. All right. So there's the first incident. This all happened at night. At night. Okay, so now we'll pick up the events of the evening in Mark chapter 14. We're just going to see what all the Bible says, and I've gone through this. What I did was I printed out all the verses from each of the Gospels, and I laid them out on a table side by side and just read them and compared them. Basically is what I've done here. And you can do the same if you so are inclined, or if this sounds interesting to you, trying to put these things together. It's really not hard. It just takes a little time, a little thought, trying to fit it all together. And I may not have it all fit together perfectly, but generally speaking, this should follow pretty much the timeline based on what I can see and based on some of the other things that I've read in the past. For example, most of us here have read this book, Jesus Christ, Our Passover. It's a pretty good sized book. This is about the most comprehensive book I have ever read on the last week of Jesus Christ. If you can get a copy, it is printed by the Way International. You can write to them, or maybe, I don't know if they have a bookstore online, but they're the ones that sell it. I don't think it's sold on Amazon unless it's by a private seller. And if it is by a private seller on Amazon, it's expensive. I've seen them as high as $150 for this one book.
Don, they do have it at the Way International in the bookstore.
Awesome. So if you like what you're hearing, give them a call. This is an asset to your library. You won't be disappointed. It's excellent work. But what I'm doing now is, before I read that and review, I want to go to the scriptures and rework it myself, put this together for myself, and then I'll check myself against the book, perhaps see if I've missed anything, and realign my thinking accordingly. That's how much weight I give to that book. It's very awesome book. All right, we're in Mark chapter 14, verse 53. It's still nighttime, and so Jesus is arrested. They bound him, they tie him up, take him to Annas, the high priest. Bunch of people there. Then, after a little tit for tat with Annas, the high priest, Annas has had enough, so he sends him bound to his son-in-law Caiaphas. So there's time involved. They have to walk from the Garden of Gethsemane to Annas's house. Then they have time spent there. Then they have to walk to Caiaphas's house. That takes time. I don't know how far apart they lived. They were family. Maybe they lived in the same house. Either way, it says they took him bound from one place to the next, from Annas to Caiaphas. So the point I'm making is there's time involved to go from one to the next. Now, at Caiaphas, Mark 14, verse 53, we read that, and they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. So everybody's there now, and Peter followed them at a distance, and he was in the courtyard, and so he was doing his thing. Then if we read down, to verse 57, then some stood up at this little meeting. Well, let's see, let's back up to 55. The chief priest, we're in Mark 14, verse 55. The chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin, that's like the whole Congress, the whole ruling body of Rome was there. They were looking for evidence against Jesus, or not Rome, that'd be the ruling body of the Jews. Yeah, not the ruling body of the Romans, the ruling body of the Jews. I think that's right. Anyways, yeah. So all these guys, the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, they were all together. And the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many, verse 56, testified falsely against him, but their statements did not even agree. Amazing. Verse 57, then some stood up, gave this false testimony against him, which was like this: we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another, not made with hands. Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Verse 60, then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? A couple of the other books say, are you the Son of God? Jesus says right here in verse 62, I am. He's the Son of God. Right there, he said it, I am. And you will see the Son, and he didn't stop there. He says, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Well, high priest didn't like that. They started tearing their clothes off. Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit on him, blindfolded him, and hit him in the face and fist with their fists and said, prophesy, prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you? Who hit you? So this is when all this happened. It was nighttime. It was a night trial. Night trials were illegal, but they did it anyway under the cover of darkness because they wanted to get him, and they had him, and they thought, this is our chance. So this all happened at night. Now, we pick up the record in Luke. It's now daybreak. This went on for a while, and now it's daybreak. They must have had a lot of people run through there they said they had a lot of false witnesses. They gave 2 examples, but there were a lot of them. So now it's daybreak. Luke 22, verse 66. It says this. Luke 22, verse 66. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. If you are the Messiah, they said, tell us. So this is like another meeting that they had to decide what are they going to do with him. And it's after daybreak, so the sun is up. Okay? And they said, they were asking Jesus again, if you are the Messiah, tell us. And Jesus answered, if I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. Verse 70, they all asked, are you then the Son of God? And he replied, you say that I am. Then they said, why do we need any more testimony? We've heard it from his own lips. Yeah, he's the Son of God. Okay. And that meant, in their minds, to them, meant he was being blasphemous. Okay. So now we pick up the record in John. All these different gospels add little bits of information, and I'm trying to put them together as best that I can. And so the next bit of information comes to us from John chapter 18. John chapter 18, and we'll start reading in verse 28. So after they were saying, we've heard it from his own lips, we don't need any more testimony. Verse 28 of John 18 says, then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. The Roman governor is Pilate. So now they're leaving Caiaphas' palace, and they're going to the palace of the Roman governor. By now, look at what it says here. By now, it was early morning. It's no longer daybreak. Now it's early morning. Not necessarily mid-morning or late morning or just morning, but it was early morning. So after they decided, it didn't take them long to decide what to do with Jesus. They left Caiaphas and went to Caiaphas's place and went to the palace. They're going to the Romans now. Now, it says here in verse 28 that once they got there, to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to do what? Eat the Passover. So this is all occurring after the Last Supper. This is another place that gives us information that the Last Supper could not have been Passover, because it tells us right here it's still future, hadn't come yet. Okay, so verse 29. So Pilate, since they didn't go in, Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" Verse 30. "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." And then they said, "But we have no right to execute anyone." And this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Verse 33, Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and they had a little discussion. And verse 33 says, Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "Is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me?" And Pilate says, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "Oh, you're a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And then that was enough for Pilate. He says, "What is truth?" And he walked out. And he went out to the Jews and said, "Hey, I find no basis for a charge against this man." And so now we go to Luke chapter 23. Luke 23. And we pick up the record in Luke 23. And in Luke 23, verse 4, it says, "Then Pilate announced to the chief priests in the crowd, 'I find no basis for a charge against this man.'" Same thing it said in John. Verse 5, "But they insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." And Pilate goes, "He started where? Galilee? Really?" Verse 6, "On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. 'You mean he's a Galilean?' Verse 7, "When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he said, 'Cool, I'm going to send him over there. Herod will like this.' So he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time." Okay, so now we've got more time involved. All these guards are taking Jesus to Herod. I don't know how far away he was. All I know is that they sent him there. And so now you've got more time involved. Things are taking place on this morning, the morning of this day. So this takes time. They didn't have cars. They walked everywhere they went. All right. So so we go to Luke 23, and we're in Luke 23 and verse 8. "So now when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, who was also in the, and because for a long time Herod, had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some kind, some sort. He was all excited. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there. They followed them all the way to Herod's place. Can you believe that? So they were there, and they were vehemently accusing him all the time while he was there. Verse 11, "Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him too, and they dressed him in an elegant robe, making fun of him, and then they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became good friends. Before this, they had been enemies, but now they were friends." Amazing. Jesus brought these two guys together. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so here we are. Now he's back at Pilate's place. All right. So they arrested him. They took him to Annas, the high priest. Then they took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, and he was there all night. Then at daybreak, they took him to Pilate. Pilate found out he was a Galilean. Now they send him to Herod. Herod has a good time. He's all friends with Pilate again, but he's all bored now. And after ridiculing Jesus and making fun of him, they send him back to Pilate. Okay, so now we pick up the record in Luke 23, same chapter, and in verse 13, where it says, Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. So Pilate is now out there saying, okay, everybody gather around, come on, all of you guys. Chief priests, yeah, rulers, yeah, and the people, yeah, you too. Okay. And he said to them all, you brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. While I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him, and neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him. Now we go to Mark to see how they all responded. Mark 15 is where we're going. Mark 15. And in Mark 15, we're going to verse 6. Verse 6, we're going to read about 8 verses. Okay? Verse 6 of Mark 15 says, now it was the custom at the festival to release a prisoner who the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison at this time who was with the insurrectionists, and he had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate, after he talked to him, the crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. And then Pilate says, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Verse 10, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him, he wasn't really expecting much. Verse 11, but the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. Verse 12, what shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews? And they all said, crucify him, crucify him. Verse 14, Pilate says, why? What crime has he committed? But they didn't care. They were all just in a tizzy and shouted all the louder, crucify him, crucify him. So Pilate doesn't know what to do. So he goes back in. And while Pilate, and so now we want to go to Matthew chapter 27 and pick up the record there. Matthew 27. This is kind of fun. I like doing this. Matthew 27. It takes a little while to do this, but then when you get it done, you just read it like this, and you really get the whole story of how this all came about. It's just fascinating. Matthew 27, verse 19. And in verse 19, it says, while Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, he's trying to figure out, gee, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? His wife sent him this message. Now, this message is not recorded anywhere else in the Bible other than right here. So if you didn't read Matthew to get all this information, you never get it. You'd wonder, well, when did that happen? Well, now you know. It was after they brought him, after daybreak, they brought Jesus to Pilate. Pilate sent Jesus to Herod. Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. And now Pilate doesn't know what to do because people don't want him to release him. They want to crucify him. So Pilate goes back in and he doesn't know what to do. And then he gets this message from his wife. Matthew 27, verse 19 says, while Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message. Don't you have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Wow. That's interesting. You got the wife leaning on him now. Okay. Verse 20. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. Verse 21. So Pilate goes back out. He says, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they answered, Barabbas. Verse 22. Oh, well, then what shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked. They all said, crucify him. What crime has he committed? They didn't care. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Okay. So, when did this message come? Did it come before he went out or before he came back in? I'm not sure yet, but it was right around the same time. This first appearance of Pilate to the people. But Pilate came in and went out and came in and went out a whole bunch of times. At least 3 times, maybe more. And so now we're going to pick up another time after this message has been delivered to him. Now we go to John chapter 19. John chapter 19. And we pick up the record again. So in John chapter 19 and in verse 1, Pilate, it says, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The 2 soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out. Okay? And he said to the Jews gathered there, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here he is. Here's the man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify, crucify, crucify. The chief priests were leading the cheers. And of course, the other people would follow because they were all afraid of these guys. Okay. But Pilate answered, verse 6, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. Verse 7, the Jewish leaders insisted, We have a law. We have a law. Yeah, they have many laws, but it says, We have a law. And according to that law, he must die. Because he claimed to be God. I mean, the Son of God. Oops, slip of the tongue. Verse 8. When Pilate heard this, now he was even more afraid. Oh, man. This guy might be the Son of God. Oh, my gosh. Holy smokes. He was even more afraid. Verse 9, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. He needed to make sure he was not doing something really stupid. He asked Jesus, Where do you come from? Jesus gave him no answer. And Pilate says, Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. And verse 12, now there's another appeal to the crowd. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out, and he sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, and gave his verdict. Verse 14. What day is it? Verse 14. It was the day of preparation of the Passover, and it was about noon. So this all took about 6 hours. After they brought him to Pilate, then Pilate sent him to Herod. Herod sends him back to Pilate. Pilate goes out, talks to the people several times, trying to convince him to let him go because he can't find any fault with him. He goes back in. talks to Jesus, goes back out, talks to the Jews, goes back in, talks to Jesus, goes back out. He has him flogged. He takes him out, shows him to the people, comes back in. I could really make things better for you if you just talk to me. Yep. So now it's about noon, and he's outside, and Herod says, "Here's your king." And they shouted, take him away, crucify him." And Pilate, one last time, says, "Shall I crucify your king?" And they say, "We have no king but Caesar." Then in Matthew chapter 27, go to Matthew 27. It kind of ties this all up. Matthew 27. We're getting close. It's noon. We've covered about 12 hours here. It's about noon, and in Matthew 27 and verse 24, it says, "When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd and said, 'I am innocent of this man's blood, and it is your responsibility.'" Verse 25, all the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Well, that's a big responsibility there. So then he released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then in verse 27 it says, "Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium," that's where all the soldiers lived, the praetorium, "and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him." A company of soldiers is way more than a legion of soldiers. I'm not sure. I didn't look this up. I know a legion of soldiers, I think, is 770. Could be wrong on that. It's a lot for a legion. A company, I think, is like 1,000. It's a lot. I could be wrong on those numbers, but I know that a company is way bigger than a legion. Okay. Anyways, the point is there were a lot of them in there, and they had him from noon until 9 the next morning, the third hour of the day. They had him from 9. Correction. What did they say? They had him from noon-ish, sometime a little afternoon, when Pilate gave them over to him. They were there from noon through the end of the day, through all the night, until they let him out the next morning. And when he came out, he did not look like a man. They did everything to him but break his bones. The guy was a mess. And you can imagine they probably it's like death by 1,000 cuts. They didn't want to kill him. They just wanted to make him feel as much pain as possible because they hated him. And after that much time, I can imagine he probably wouldn't have looked like a man. He'd have been beat up pretty bad. And so then we pick up the record here. Let me read this again. Matthew 27, 27, and then we'll go to Mark 15 to end it all. Matthew 27, verse 27 says, "Then the governor, all his soldiers, took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him. They put a scarlet robe on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. They knelt in front of him and mocked him, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they said, and they spit on him, and they took the staff and they struck him on the head again and again." And this continued and continued and continued throughout the night until the next morning. And in Mark 15, we have about 4 more verses, and we will finish this little scenario. Mark 15, verse 21. 15:21. And a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, he was passing by on his way in from the country. You know, a lot of people were doing this. It was Passover. Everybody came to Jerusalem for Passover. And he was one of them. He was from Cyrene. I think it's in Egypt somewhere. He was on his way. He came a long way. He'd gone through all the preparations, the mental preparedness, the physical preparedness. He was totally ready for Passover. And now he's here at the right place at the right time. Just as Jesus was coming out, a certain man named Simon, from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing his clothes. They cast lots. Verse 25, it was 9 in the morning when they crucified him. 9 in the morning. Jesus hadn't slept from the morning before the Passover meal until he died, 3 p.m. on the day before Passover. That is about 40 hours. 40 hours. He started his ministry in the wilderness, was there 40 days and 40 nights, something like that. And now he ends his last 40 hours without sleep by doing the will of God, all for us. And so now we have a pretty complete picture. Quickly, Jesus was arrested. He was taken to Annas. Then he was taken to Caiaphas and all the Sanhedrin. Then they took him to the palace before Pilate. Then Pilate sent him to Herod. Herod then sent him back to Pilate. Pilate appeals to the people several times, going in and out, hears from his wife, says, don't get involved with this, let him go. And he's doing his best to let the guy go. He's in and out and in and out. The people want Barabbas. And then he decides he washes his hands, and a company of soldiers take him to the praetorium, beat the crap out of him for the next, what would that be, about 12, 15 hours. Just unbelievable. I can only imagine. And then he's led out at 9 a.m. and crucified. And he did it all for us. And that's that's putting the remote context of the Gospels together in a little less than an hour. There's a lot more that can go into this. A lot of other things took place during this time. The denials of Peter, you could spend a whole lot of time on that. But basically, the denials of Peter took place during that cock crowing watch. That's why how that all worked out. And so when you put it all together, it was pretty awesome what he went through. And we're very thankful that he did. You can only imagine. He knew this was coming. He was sweating bullets. Remember, and he says, if there's any other way, prayed 3 times. And it said he sweat drops as of blood. It didn't really say he sweat blood, but it was a figure of speech. He was really stressed out. You get stressed out, you start to perspire. You go to a job interview. If you're nervous, you can sweat a little bit. Well, he was in a stressful situation and he was sweating. He did not want to do it, but God's will overruled his will. and we are very thankful. So, Father, I thank you for this word that you have laid in our lap. I am so thankful that you have had this written so that we can read it and work it and learn it and just see the heroism of our big brother Jesus and what he all went through just for us. It's totally awesome.
Mm.
And we're very thankful. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Right. Mm.
Don, I looked up the Legion for you, and this thing says there were about 30 legions in the Roman army. Each legion had between 4,000 and 6,000 soldiers called legionnaires.
Okay.
So yes, there were a lot of them.
There were a lot of them. And you know they all wanted their turn. Well, what was it? He had 12 legions of angels.
Yeah.
Recall. How many was that? 72,000?
Yes.
So it'd be 6,000 to a legion. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
It's a bunch.
And then a company was how many legions? Did it say? It was more than one.
Well, it says each legion had 10 cohorts. I don't know what that means.
Mhm.
Each cohort was made up of 6 troops of about 80 legionnaires called centuries.
Mhm.
I put in a search for how many soldiers were in a legion, and this is what it came up with.
Yeah. Mhm. There's about what, 6,000 fish?
Yeah, for a legion. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm.
Some pretty nifty stuff you taught there, Don.
Mhm. Yeah. Now I can go back and read this, and some of it will make a little bit more sense, perhaps.
Yep.
This is really deep. This is awesome. This got me started, and so now it's like one of my favorite topics in the Bible, just to read and study, because it's like a big history book. It's all there.
Yep. I love the way you showed in John that this is all happening before the preparation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
there were several. There were more than one preparation day. All the days leading up to the Passover were preparation days. And I think they chose the lamb 3 days prior when the ones that they were going to sacrifice. And I think each of those 3 days was called a preparation day, like the preparation day, where they kept the lambs and made sure they didn't get any blemishes on them, and they were just perfect in every way. And so,
Wasn't the lamb sacrificed at the exact time that Jesus died?
yes,
mhm.
it's also the exact time that the curtain at the temple
Mhm.
tore.
From top to bottom.
Yeah.
And like Don said last week, this wasn't a small curtain. This was a big curtain.
I think it was like a foot thick or something, 7 inches, or seems I heard somebody say once it was 7 inches thick and woven in a special way, and it was not something you could easily just, it was like a wall.
I wonder how many men it would take to carry it.
I think it had gold woven in it and everything.
Yeah.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, well, it's what separated the priests from the Holy of Holies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And only one guy got to go into there for a year.
Mm-hmm.
The rope tied around his waist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that something? It was so holy.
Just in case.
I had that if anything happened to him, how would they get him out?
Maybe it happened once, and that's why they did it.
Now that's what you call ingenuity.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah. And what is it? And belief in in morals and in rules
Yeah.
and laws of that nature. I mean, they had such a fear of God that there's no way I'm not going in there.
Yeah.
No way. I got the short straw. Nope, not happening.
Remember the Ark? There's a record where
Yeah.
some Philistines run in and pick it up and carry it off. And then the Jews go after it, and some of them just grab it, and they're not Levites, and they kill over dead.
Yeah.
Mm. Wow.
They take the ark. The Philistines took the ark, and all their animals died, and all kinds of stuff happened while they had it.
Yeah.
They said, "We got to get rid of this thing." They gave it back.
Sort of like in Indiana Jones, the Germans wanted to, after the first
Yeah.
incident, they didn't want it anymore.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Well, it's been an interesting week, to say the least, especially if you've been on Facebook.
Hmm.
Everybody and their brother yelling at each other.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, they just trying to stir the pot, just like the chief priests.
Yep.
Most of them don't even know why they believe what they believe or say what they say. They're just kind of
Because
going
somebody somewhere along the way told them this is
Yeah.
what we think, and so they said, "Okay, I'll believe that."
Mm-hmm. And they say it in a convincing way, and
Wouldn't it be easier just to go to the Word of God and find out what God says about it?
Yep.
Mm. Mm.
That'd be too simple.
We heard a great teaching on that yesterday
Yeah.
at John's.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So anything somebody wants to talk about?
back to the scriptures, and people have kind of poo-pooed them, and it's just a book.
Mm.
It's a nice book.
Just the book of eternity.
It's a little bit more than nice.
Mm.
Well, it's a nice book, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a nice enough book to base your whole life on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm.
Some of us have. Everybody here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Works for me.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
So
it works too. Yeah. Basing my life on that book works for me.
Mm-hmm.
amen.
Mm.
Literally too.
So anything else happening with anybody?
The sun was out today.
Yes.
Yes, we have.
Been for a long time.
Are you guys
Yeah.
ready for this? We had this afternoon blue sky. Whoa! It was so long since I've seen a blue sky. I almost stopped the car and went, "Wow!"
Mm. Mm. Mm.
It was very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a nice day in Nashville.
yeah.
How warm is it in Nashville these days?
Well, let me see here. I'll tell you what the temperature is. Right now, let me see. It's 50 degrees right now, but it was up in the 70s.
Uh,
I'm jealous.
It's 50 degrees here in Brooklyn too.
I'm very jealous. We had the mid 40s today. Right now we're at 36.
34.
Warmer.
34 in New Albany.
John, I don't suppose you'd be too upset if my husband and my 4 cats and I showed up at your door one day, would you? And he's choking right now.
Well, I don't know about the cats now.
Trying to jump under the table, huh, John?
Well,
I can't blame him.
but yeah, I'd like to meet you, see you here, and be nice.
Just
Have a
leave the
visitor.
cats at home, right?
Huh?
You just leave the cats at home, huh?
Well, you know, they're nice animals, but I don't particularly care for them.
You're a dog person, right?
Well, yeah, if I was to have a pet, a dog, yes.
I'd miss having a dog. We're not allowed to have dogs here.
Mm.
I miss having one.
There are a couple of cute cat things I came across today on Facebook. By the way, that was my wife who just snuck by.
I saw her. How was her birthday, by the way? Did she have a nice one?
Yeah, she did. She was real happy. And, yeah, it's a great day for her.
Terrific.
She gets to retire now.
Oh, well,
65.
What does she do?
What does she do? She sits around the house and watches TV.
What is she retiring from then?
Oh, she was a cashier at a major grocery chain here.
That's a tough job.
Yeah. Whole family was involved in retail at some point. I mean, I did retail for most of my life.
Oh.
I tried it for a while. I had nothing but back problems. My back hurt me, my knees hurt me, my feet hurt me, my ankles hurt. Stand there so long.
Yeah.
For me, it's my hands because I've worked in the freezers and the dairy.
Oh, yeah.
And I have arthritis like you wouldn't believe in my hands. Sometimes you get into these awful positions.
And they can't straighten out easily? What, and then your fingers can't straighten out properly?
Properly for a little while. I usually have to sit on my hands and warm them up, get them hot, and then I can stretch my hands out to normal. Well, that's what you get for working in a freezer for 20, 30 years. And that was with wearing gloves while I was working in the freezer.
Wow.
You can't tell me that wearing gloves in the freezer keeps your fingers all that warm.
It doesn't, especially since you can't wear big, thick gloves because you have to have some dexterity. So you can wear those like brown work gloves. You see them selling in stores. That's what I was wearing most of the time.
That's like next to it.
And
not really made for thermal protection.
no. I will never forget the summer before I went WW, we had to do an inventory in the freezer. And so I took in my sweater and heavy coat and all this, and we were in the freezer nearly all day. And at the end of the day, I came outside and it was 90 degrees out and I'm wearing a sweater and I'm still cold.
Wow.
That's the kind of cold that just kind of gets into the bones and it just stays there for a while.
It took all the way till I got home before I started feeling like I was warming up a little bit.
Right.
But those were great days.
Mm.
How's
During
the weather in Ohio?
Hmm?
I was
It was
asking how the weather was in Ohio.
Oh,
It was sunny today. Sunny got up about, I think it might have got to 60, but it was bright, brilliant sunshine, real gentle breeze. Really, really nice day.
I'm jealous of you guys.
Down in the 30s tonight, though, and probably the 50s tomorrow, maybe the rest of the week. 40s, 50s for highs.
Yeah, we're going to be in the low to mid
We're freezing more
40s.
than we weren't now, so that's a good sign.
I actually went outside today.
All right.
Isn't it surprising how much warmer it is in New York now? You're about an hour and a half drive from where I'm at, maybe 2 at the most.
Mhm.
Yet your weather is so much warmer there in New York than we are here in Connecticut.
I think it's because we sit right on the Gulf Stream,
That could
and so the water is warm, and the warmth comes off the water.
Mm.
I know I used to have the same thing in Massachusetts when I lived up on Cape Cod. We were right there on the Gulf Stream, and it was, you know, they had their days, and of course, that where it was cold and mean and nasty, but for the most part, it really wasn't that bad.
Mm.
In someplace like I lived in Colorado, which was by far worse.
Mm.
Yeah, the funny thing about living in Connecticut is that you've got a storm coming across the country and it gets about to New York, and then it either goes way north or way south and hits Long Island Sound or aims up toward Massachusetts, and we don't really get it here.
Mm.
And it
Yes.
does that all
It's funny here, the way the weather patterns. Like with Hurricane Sandy, what happened is it passed New York. It went, you know, like past New York, but then it turned around and came this way at New York.
that. Oops, I missed it.
Yeah,
Kind of like the one in Houston.
yeah,
Yeah.
Very similar.
very
Only the one
similar.
in Houston just kind of sat there for a while. That was what really hurt them.
Yeah, but with this storm, we thought we'd seen the end of it, and suddenly it turns around and comes back.
Yeah, double whammy.
Yeah. And when it came back, it was a much milder storm, but it was a direct hit.
Yeah.
Came right up the Hudson River.
Mm.
You're far enough inland to be safe from that kind of stuff, aren't you, Don?
Oh yeah, I mean, like we got to be 5 miles from the water.
I'm a block and a half away from Long Island Sound.
Mm.
So when
Yeah,
Sandy came through, the ocean, the surge from the ocean came about halfway up our yard.
Mm.
Yeah,
That's close.
Wow.
two of my nephews, one lived right on.
Mm.
Do you remember hearing reports about the fires and the fire trucks couldn't get to the fires because it was all flooded?
Yeah.
One nephew lives there, and the other one lives right on in Brooklyn, right on the, practically right on the water, and they got hit really bad.
Makes you want to move inland.
You know, and here I am. I'm sitting right next to a shelter.
Walter?
A shelter is just down the street from us. It's a high school.
For
A
things
shelter, if there's a disaster at the water.
It's for you.
Just a second, I have a phone call. Go ahead and talk.
Mm.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Hello? Yes, I am. Do you have Facebook? Go to Facebook and let's see.
Mhm.
Right. And it should, now you won't get into where we are, but you can see what's going on. Actually, we're almost finished. So tell you what, send me an email tomorrow, and next week I'll make sure that you get the link.
Any conversation that Don would be willing to interrupt fellowship for, I'm listening to.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, hang out on air. Hang out on air. Yeah.
Well, we had
Yeah,
some
that's
tornadoes
where you
come
should
through.
go. Unless that's it changes every week.
Speaking of weather, this past weekend.
What did you have,
Yeah.
John?
I'll tell you what, like I said, just send me
Yeah.
an email tomorrow, and from now on,
They were up in Kentucky more so, but
Monday night, about an hour
Clarksville
ahead,
got hit,
I'll send
which
you
is
the link on where to go, so that you can see it. No
in
problem.
Tennessee, about
Okay. God bless. Bye bye.
40 miles northwest of here. Got hit with some
With what?
tornadoes. Clarksville, Tennessee.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why aren't you right there in the mountains?
No, Nashville's in Middle Tennessee. The mountains are in East Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Then Memphis is
Not that it would
west.
affect you.
Yeah, Memphis is what, Don? I didn't hear you, Chris.
Memphis is west Tennessee.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that you were close enough to mountains that you wouldn't have that problem.
No, that's East Tennessee.
It's a little hilly down there.
Yeah, it sits in a
like
valley. Nashville does. It's got some hills around it, but no mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So how many tornadoes did you have go through?
I don't know. I know some hit around Clarksville, Tennessee, and then up in Bowling Green where my son lives. There were some up that way too. And then I saw a little clip, something about in Arkansas, maybe some in Mississippi this weekend.
Yeah, it was just all rain by the time it got to Ohio. I think we got like 5 inches in the last 5 days or 6 days, something like that, last week.
We're so waterlogged, I don't know what we're going to do with more water.
Yeah.
All the reservoirs full by now.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Who was that, Don?
That was Janet Page. She wants to come. She wants to see the fellowship on Monday night.
Cool.
And so I told her to send me an email, and next week I will make sure that she has the link so she can at least see it. And then if you want to come, just watch it a couple times, make sure you want to come. And then if she still wants to come, I'll invite her to come.
Mm-hmm.
I know that name.
Yeah, she was at Mike's fellowship one night, I think.
Was she? No, I'm thinking I know that name from Facebook.
Probably.
Obviously.
Yeah.
She's probably one of my friends on Facebook.
Probably. So.
Well, I think I'm going to cut out. I got an early day tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. We can call it a night. Nothing that says we have to go till 10. As I told Alan, this ain't the way ministry. You don't have these hard, fast rules that you must follow.
Thank God.
Amen. You're late for a meeting, don't come in.
Really?
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. All right, so to all of you people out there, good night. We'll see you next week.
Night.
Love you.